swear that's how the story goes.
Welcome to the Zombie Story Zone, the place where darkness dances with desire and the dead refuse to rest. Tonight, we bring you a chilling tale of love, betrayal, and the restless spirits that walk among us. Picture this: a fog-shrouded town called Willowshade, a place where whispers of an ancient curse float on the midnight breeze. They say a beautiful woman in a tattered wedding dress wanders the streets, her veil hiding a face both breathtaking and broken. She is known only as the Midnight Bride, a seductress who preys on lonely men, offering them the kiss of death and a fate far worse than the grave. But who was she? What heartbreak or betrayal twisted her soul into something so dark? And what happens to those unlucky enough to fall under her spell? In tonight's story, we follow Jake Thompson, a city writer drawn into Willowshade's web of secrets. Alone in a town that time forgot, he'll confront the legend himself and learn that some love stories never die. They simply refuse to stay buried. So grab your headphones, dim the lights, and prepare to descend into the shadows of the Zombie Story Zone, where the line between the living and the dead is blurred, and the Midnight Bride awaits. Stay tuned if you dare.
As the horror unfolds in the Zombie Story Zone, adventure never grows old. Grades and laughter, it's a crazy mix with every twist and turn we'll learn.
In the quiet town of Willowshade, darkness crept in long before the sun set. Shadows clung to the cobblestone streets like old regrets, and even the wind seemed to whisper secrets best left alone. Every local knew that when the moon rose and the fog rolled in, the Midnight Bride would awaken. She was more than a story. She was a warning. A beautiful woman in a torn, faded wedding dress, her eyes forever hidden behind a veil of white lace. They said she roamed the streets at midnight, her footsteps silent, her presence a cold shiver down your spine. No one knew exactly where she came from, but everyone knew her name, Eleanor Grayson. Over a century ago, Eleanor was set to marry the wealthiest man in Willowshade. On the day of her wedding, tragedy struck. Her fiancé vanished, eloping with her best friend. Betrayed and humiliated, Eleanor fled the chapel in tears and vanished into the night. Some claimed she threw herself into the river. Others whispered she made a deal with something far more sinister. Whatever happened that night, Eleanor was never seen alive again. But that was only the beginning. Not long after her disappearance, men began to vanish, lonely souls who wandered the streets at night. Some were found days later, lifeless and cold, with eyes that stared at nothing. Others were never found at all. Those who saw them claimed the men wore dazed, empty expressions, as if their souls had been drained. The legend grew over generations. Eleanor had returned, transformed into the Midnight Bride, a spirit of heartbreak and revenge. She would seduce lonely men, offering them a touch of warmth and a promise of love, only to feast on their souls and leave their corpses reanimated, slaves to her sorrowful wrath. Parents warned their sons, old-timers lit candles on their porches, and bars closed early. Yet the Midnight Bride always found someone foolish or desperate enough to meet her gaze. Some said she was cursed, doomed to wander until she found someone to take her place. Others believed she was searching for her lost love, forever trapped between this world and the next. Whatever the truth, one thing was certain: after midnight, no man was safe in Willowshade. And as fate would have it, a stranger named Jake Thompson was about to arrive, unaware that his own fate was about to collide with the legend of the Midnight Bride. Jake Thompson stepped off the bus with a hopeful smile and a battered suitcase. He'd left the chaos of city life behind, seeking inspiration for his next novel, a thriller that would finally put his name on the map. Willowshade seemed like the perfect place to find a quiet corner and a bit of old-world charm. The town looked like something out of a Victorian painting. Brick buildings with ivy-covered walls, gas lamps that flickered even in daylight, and cobblestone streets that carried the faint scent of rain. But behind the quaint beauty, Jake felt something else, a sense of sadness that clung to the air like a forgotten dream. His cottage was small and creaked with every step, but he found it cozy. The landlord, Mr. Beckett, had given him a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes and warned him not to wander too far after dark. Jake had chuckled, thinking it was just a local superstition. That evening, eager to meet the locals, Jake made his way to the Silver Lantern, a rustic bar at the heart of town. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of old wood and cheap beer. The locals sat in clusters, their voices low. Behind the bar stood Tom, an older man with a bushy mustache and tired eyes. He poured Jake a drink with a practiced hand. "You're new here," Tom said, his voice gravelly. "Yeah," Jake replied, raising his glass. "Thought I'd find some peace and quiet to finish my book. I hear this town has history." Tom gave a bitter laugh. "History? That's one way to put it. Just be careful, son. Don't go wandering after dark." Jake smirked. "Let me guess. Ghost stories?" Tom leaned in, his gaze serious. "Stories that'll chill your bones. The Midnight Bride, they call her. Beautiful as an angel, deadly as the grave. She hunts at night, looking for men like you." Jake raised an eyebrow. "You're kidding." Tom's eyes darkened. "Men have vanished. Some come back, changed. Some don't come back at all." Jake felt a shiver dance along his spine, a thrill of fear and excitement. "Sounds like the perfect tale for my book." Tom's lips pressed into a thin line. "Just remember, stories like that have a way of becoming real in Willowshade." Jake finished his drink, a nervous laugh escaping his lips. He didn't believe in ghosts. But as he left the bar, the fog rolled in and the shadows deepened. Maybe, just maybe, this town was more than it seemed. Jake couldn't sleep that night. The town felt different in the dark, the air heavy and cold, as though the shadows themselves were alive. Fog crept through the narrow streets, curling like ghostly fingers around the lampposts. He grabbed his jacket and stepped outside, determined to clear his mind. He'd always found inspiration in night walks, something about the quiet, the emptiness. But tonight, the silence pressed on his ears like a warning. As he strolled down the main street, he noticed how the shops looked abandoned, their windows dark and lifeless. Even the silver lantern had its lights dimmed. He turned a corner, and that's when he saw her. She stood beneath an ancient oak, her torn wedding dress billowing in the wind. A thin, tattered veil covered her face, and in the fog she looked almost ethereal. Her head was bowed and her hands trembled at her sides. "Miss?" Jake called softly. Her head snapped up and she turned toward him. Even through the veil, he could see the beauty in her features, a sharp jawline, delicate lips, and eyes that glowed with a sorrowful light. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice catching in his throat. She tilted her head, her lips curving into a sad, knowing smile. "I'm lost," she whispered, her voice like the wind rustling leaves. "Will you help me?" Something deep inside Jake, a mixture of fear and fascination, drew him closer. Her voice seemed to echo in his mind, wrapping around his thoughts like a spell. "Of course," he said, though his heart pounded in his chest. "What do you need?" She reached out a hand, her fingers pale as moonlight, and he felt a chill seep into his bones as he took it. Her touch was ice, but her eyes, those eyes, held a warmth that made him want to weep. "Come with me," she whispered. Jake's feet moved of their own accord. Every step felt like wading through water, his body heavy, his mind foggy. They walked past the church, its windows dark as empty eyes, and into the shadows of the cemetery beyond. He felt his strength draining, the air growing colder with every step. As they reached a crumbling gravestone, she turned to him, her veil falling away. Her eyes were dark voids, her mouth twisted in a sorrowful grin. "Your soul will be mine," she breathed, and with that, everything went black. Jake woke with a start, his breath ragged and sweat-soaked hair clinging to his forehead. He was in his bed, the pale morning light creeping through the curtains. For a moment, he wondered if it had all been a dream, until he noticed the cold ache in his chest and the faint bruising on his wrist, exactly where she had gripped him. His memories were a jumble of fog and shadows. Her icy touch, her soft whisper in the dark, the way the cemetery seemed to swallow them whole. He shivered, pulling the blanket tighter around him. Over the next few days, Jake couldn't shake the feeling of something clinging to him. He lost his appetite, the taste of food turning to ash on his tongue. His skin turned pale, and his reflection in the mirror looked hollow, his eyes sunken like he hadn't slept in weeks. The nights were the worst. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her, her pale, beautiful face beneath that veil, her mournful eyes glowing in the darkness. In his dreams, she called to him, her voice a melody that both comforted and terrified him. He began to research the town's legends, desperate for answers. The library was quiet, the dusty shelves lined with old books and yellowed newspapers. In the far corner, he found a small volume titled Whispers of Willowshade. Its cracked spine and faded cover felt fragile in his hands. He flipped through the pages until he found her name, Eleanor Grayson. The story was familiar, but there was more than he'd heard at the bar. It spoke of heartbreak and betrayal, how Eleanor's fiancé had run away with her maid of honor on their wedding day. But it also spoke of a curse, how Eleanor's soul had refused to rest, fueled by the rage and sorrow of her last breath. It was said that she wandered the town at night, luring men with her beauty and feeding on their souls to ease her pain, turning them into mindless husks that served her will. Jake's hands trembled as he read. He felt a cold certainty settle over him. She had marked him that night. He could feel her presence in his bones, a dark thread tying them together. Determined to find help, he went to the local historian, Mira, whose knowledge of Willowshade's past was legendary. Her house was a clutter of old tomes and flickering candles, the air heavy with incense. Mira listened as Jake told her everything, about the woman in the fog, the way she had looked at him, the coldness that had seeped into his soul. When he finished, she was silent for a moment, her eyes dark with worry. "You've seen her," Mira said softly. "You've been touched by her curse. The Midnight Bride does not let go so easily, Jake. She will haunt you until she claims what she believes is hers." Jake swallowed, his throat dry. "Then how do I stop her?" Mira took a deep breath, her fingers brushing the ancient ring that hung from a chain around her neck. "There may be a way, but it won't be easy. You'll have to confront her where she is strongest, where her heart still lingers." And so, with fear and determination warring inside him, Jake prepared for the battle ahead. Jake followed Mira's directions out of town and into the forest, the air growing colder with every step. The path wound between ancient trees whose gnarled branches reached for the sky like bony fingers. The fog was thicker here, a blanket of gray that muffled every sound. His heart thudded in his chest as he remembered Mira's words. She waits where her sorrow began. The old chapel, abandoned for over a century, stood deep in the woods, its roof sagging and its windows shattered. It was there, Mira insisted, that Eleanor's rage had taken root. A crow cawed overhead, startling him. He almost turned back, but he'd come too far to quit. He couldn't let her win. He reached the chapel just as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky a bloody red. The wooden door creaked open at his touch, revealing a darkness that seemed to breathe. Inside, the air was heavy with decay and the scent of old flowers. Moonlight streamed through the broken windows, casting twisted shadows across the cracked altar. "Eleanor?" Jake called, his voice trembling. A cold breeze stirred the dust. He saw her then, standing near the altar, her veil drawn low. Her wedding dress glowed in the moonlight, torn and stained by time. "You came," she said, her voice both gentle and sorrowful. "I've waited so long for someone like you." Jake swallowed hard. "Why me?" She lifted her head, and for the first time he saw the pain etched into her face, eyes dark with endless grief, lips trembling with the memory of betrayal. "I loved him," she whispered. "I trusted him. He left me alone, humiliated. My heart shattered, and I was cursed to wander." Her voice grew colder. "I needed a soul to keep me company. Yours called to me." Jake's mind raced. "But you don't have to do this. Let go, Eleanor. Find peace." Her laughter was a brittle thing, sharp as broken glass. "Peace? There is no peace for the betrayed, only hunger." The shadows writhed around her, and Jake felt his strength draining, his breath growing shallow. Summoning every ounce of courage, he drew the silver pendant Mira had given him from his pocket. Its surface gleamed in the moonlight. "Then take this," he said, his voice fierce. "Take the pain and end it." Eleanor shrieked, her veil torn away to reveal eyes like bottomless pits. She lunged at him, but as the pendant's light touched her, her scream turned into a wail of sorrow, and then silence. Jake stood alone in the ruined chapel, the pendant warm in his hand. He knew it wasn't over, but he had faced her, and for now, he had survived. Jake staggered out of the chapel, the silver pendant still glowing faintly in his trembling hand. The night air was cold and damp, carrying with it the scent of moss and old earth. His heart pounded with exhaustion and fear, but a fragile sense of victory clung to him. He had faced her and lived. Yet every step felt heavy, as if the darkness still clung to his soul. The fog shifted around him like a living thing, curling through the trees and sighing with the wind. He couldn't shake the image of Eleanor's sorrowful eyes, the way her voice had trembled with heartbreak and rage. She was human once, he whispered to himself. She just wanted love. But love had betrayed her, twisted her spirit into something monstrous. Jake wondered if he was truly safe, or if some part of her still lingered, waiting to finish what she had begun. The pendant had grown cold now, its glow gone. Mira had said it was blessed with the tears of a mother who had lost her child to the Midnight Bride's curse, a symbol of grief that had the power to sever Eleanor's hold. Jake reached the edge of the forest, where Mira's house stood like a small, flickering sanctuary in the dark. Candles glowed in the windows, their flames steady against the night. He knocked on the door, his knuckles raw and white. Mira opened it, her face pale and drawn. She took one look at him and ushered him inside, wrapping a warm shawl around his shoulders. "Did you see her?" she asked, her voice trembling. Jake nodded, sinking into a worn armchair. "I saw her. He struggled for words. "I used the pendant, just like you said. She vanished. But I can still feel her, like she's not completely gone." Mira's eyes darkened. "She was powerful, Jake. More than just a spirit, she was a force of heartbreak and revenge. You've weakened her, but you haven't destroyed her. She's tied to this town by blood and betrayal." Jake shuddered. "So what now? How do I end this? Truly end it?" Mira leaned forward, her fingers brushing the old ring around her neck. "To truly set her free, you need to find her grave. That's where her power is strongest, and where she can finally be laid to rest." Jake felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. "Where is it?" She hesitated, glancing at a tattered map on her table. Deep in the old cemetery, behind the iron gates. Her family tomb, a place no one dares to visit. Jake's pulse quickened. "Then that's where I'll go." Mira placed a hand on his arm. "You'll need more than courage. Take this." She pressed a small vial of holy water into his palm, its weight oddly comforting. "It's been blessed by generations of Willowshade's protectors. It might give you a fighting chance." Jake clenched the vial, determination shining in his tired eyes. He had faced her once, but now he would finish it, end the curse that had haunted Willowshade for over a century. Outside, the wind howled like a warning, but Jake knew he couldn't run from the Midnight Bride any longer. It was time to confront the darkness one last time. Jake stood at the edge of the old cemetery, the iron gates towering before him like the jaws of a great beast. Rust clung to the metal, and the hinges creaked like bones as he pushed the gate open. A cold wind swept through the graveyard, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and decay. Every step deeper into the cemetery felt like crossing a threshold into another world, a place where the living didn't belong. The moonlight cast long, twisted shadows over the crumbling headstones, some tilted and cracked, others nearly swallowed by ivy. In the distance, he saw it, a mausoleum of weathered stone, its roof caved in, and its entrance sealed by a heavy iron door. A faded name was etched above the doorway. "Grayson." Jake's heart pounded. "This is it," he whispered, his voice barely carrying over the wind. The door groaned as he pushed it open, the sound echoing like a dying breath. Inside, the air was thick with mold and centuries of silence. Dust floated in the moonlight, giving the place an otherworldly glow. He took a step forward, his footfall stirring the silence. The tomb was lined with cracked marble, the name Eleanor carved into a central slab, her final resting place. But the air felt wrong, charged with an energy that prickled his skin. Suddenly, a cold wind swept through the chamber, extinguishing his lantern. Darkness closed in around him like a living thing. Panic clawed at his chest. He fumbled for the holy water Mira had given him, gripping the vial with trembling hands. A whisper slithered through the darkness. "You came back to me, Jake." Her voice, cold and sweet, drifted from every corner of the tomb. Shadows danced on the walls, shifting like wraiths. He turned in circles, searching for her, but saw only darkness. "You can't escape me," she crooned. "I've tasted your soul, and I will not let go." Jake felt a cold hand brush his neck, sending a jolt of terror through him. He spun around, but saw nothing. Then, like a phantom, she emerged from the darkness, her torn wedding gown flowing like mist, her eyes black voids that reflected his fear. "You left me alone," she hissed, her voice shifting between grief and rage. "Just like the others, you all leave." Jake raised the vial, the liquid trembling. "I won't leave you, I'll set you free." Her mouth twisted into a bitter smile. "There is no freedom, only hunger." With a roar, she lunged at him, her hands cold and claw-like. Jake cried out, splashing the holy water toward her. A blinding white light exploded and she screamed, a sound that shook the tomb and rattled his bones. He fell backward, his head hitting the stone floor. As the light faded, he opened his eyes to see her dissolving into ash, her scream lingering in the air like a curse. The darkness lifted, but the chill remained. Jake knew that some part of her might always haunt him, but for now, at least her hold was broken. He staggered out of the tomb, the wind cold against his face. The night sky stretched above, silent and still, as he left the shadows behind. Days turned into weeks, and the town of Willowshade slowly settled back into its familiar rhythm. The fog seemed lighter now, and the air carried a sense of fragile peace. But for Jake, nothing would ever be quite the same. He often found himself standing at the edge of the old cemetery, the iron gates now creaking in the breeze, but no longer holding the same dread. The tomb lay silent, the darkness he'd faced vanished, at least for now. He'd spoken to Mira one last time before she moved away to stay with family in another town. She'd told him that the Midnight Bride's curse was broken, but her story would linger in Willowshade's bones for generations. "Some legends never die," she'd whispered, her voice full of both sorrow and relief. Jake couldn't forget Eleanor's eyes, how they'd flickered between grief and rage. Even in death, she had been a victim of betrayal, trapped in a cycle of pain that had consumed her. He hoped that wherever her spirit had gone, she had finally found the peace she'd been denied in life. He carried the silver pendant with him now, a reminder of the battle he'd fought and the strength he'd discovered within himself. It felt like a small piece of protection, a ward against the darkness that still sometimes crept into his dreams. At night, when the wind rattled the windows and the shadows deepened, he'd sometimes hear her voice, a faint whisper on the breeze. He would close his eyes, breathe deeply, and remind himself that he had faced her, and he had survived. Life went on in Willowshade. The town held its secrets, and the fog still rolled in from the hills, but Jake no longer feared the darkness. He'd faced the Midnight Bride and won, but he knew that some stories are never truly over. Sometimes, late at night, he wondered, if love could drive a soul to such sorrow, what hope did any of them have? But then he'd smile, remembering that even in the darkest night, a single light could pierce the shadows. Thank you for joining me on this chilling journey into the world of the Midnight Bride, a tale of love, betrayal, and a darkness that refuses to rest, reminding us that sometimes the deepest wounds never truly heal. Jake faced a nightmare born from heartbreak, a ghostly bride who turned sorrow into a curse that haunted an entire town. But in confronting the shadows of the past, he found courage, hope, and the strength to break a century-old curse. What lingers after the story ends? Is the Midnight Bride truly gone, or does her restless spirit still wander through the fog? Sometimes the scariest stories don't end with the last page. They echo in our minds, waiting for us to listen closely in the quiet of the night. If you enjoyed this tale of horror and heartbreak, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the Zombie Story Zone for more thrilling stories that will send shivers down your spine. And now, a question for you. If you could face a ghost from the past, what would you do? Would you run, or would you stay to uncover the truth? Let me know in the comments below. I love hearing your thoughts and theories. Also, stay tuned for the next story in our series, where we'll dive deeper into the mysteries that haunt forgotten towns and restless souls. Remember, every shadow hides a secret, and every silence holds a story waiting to be told. Until next time, keep your lights low, your senses sharp, and your heart brave, because here, in the Zombie Story Zone, the dead never stay quiet for long. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next spine-tingling tale.
It's a crazy mix. With every twist and turn, we'll learn some new tricks. So grab your friends, let's dive right in the Zombie Story Zone. Let the fun begin.